Welcome to Sustainability Now, technologies and paradigms to shape a world that works. Designed for everyone interested in responsible stewardship of the planet, covering topics related to food, energy, housing, water, waste, health, economics, and consciousness. Welcome to your community, Sustainability Now, with your host, Scott Billy.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Sustainability Now. I'm Scott Billy, and today I'll be your host. And I'm super excited to be joined by a longtime advocate for renewable energy, Tom Gilbert from the ReThink Energy, New Jersey. Since 2015, Tom's served as the campaign director for energy, climate, and natural resources at the New Jersey Conservation Foundation and directs the statewide ReThink Energy campaign. It informs the public and decision makers regarding the need for rapid transition into clean, renewable energy, reduced use of fossil fuels and unnecessary pipeline, and safeguards natural areas, water resources, cultural heritage, and provides recreational opportunities to all Americans. Welcome, Tom.
Thanks for having me, Scott. Happy to be here.
Great. Why don't you give me just a little bit of background and share with everybody listening what got you started in environmental issues and where does your motivation come from?
Well, I've been working on environmental issues for a variety of nonprofit advocacy organizations really throughout my career. Coming right out of college, I went into a program called Green Corps, which is still around, and it's designed to take recent college graduates and train them in the skills of advocacy and organizing, and to launch them into careers. And that's exactly what I did. And I never looked back. And I think my passion, first and foremost, comes from a love for the land, a love for the outdoors and nature. And I went to college and grad school in Vermont, and I fell in love with the Green Mountains and the forests and the rivers, and decided I wanted to spend my life and my career working to protect them. And for many years, those are the issues that I worked on. And then I think, like many of us in recent years, as I became increasingly aware of and concerned about global climate change, I very intentionally, a little over 5 years ago, sought to find a job where I could work more squarely on that issue and on the transition away from fossil fuels to a clean energy future. And that's what led me to my current work.
Awesome. And then you found New Jersey Conservation Foundation?
Exactly. So I was hired specifically by the New Jersey Conservation Foundation to take on this new campaign, this ReThink Energy New Jersey campaign. And it really started very much in reaction to a particular project, a particular threat, the proposed Penny's pipeline, which is about 116-mile proposed interstate gas pipeline that would run from north central Pennsylvania, where sort of obviously it's a hotbed of fracking activity, with leading to enormous production of natural gas from the Marcellus Shale deposits there. And it would take that gas from Pennsylvania across the Delaware River and into New Jersey, where my organization, the New Jersey Conservation Foundation, has worked since 1960 to preserve over 125,000 acres of open space and farmland throughout the state, and has done decades of preservation work in the area of New Jersey, Hunterdon and Mercer counties along the Delaware River, where the pipeline would run. And the pipeline route very much targets those preserved lands. Back to over 4,300 acres of preserved land in New Jersey alone. That's not even looking at the Pennsylvania portion of the route, where there are also very numerous and significant preserved lands in places like Hickory Run State Park, for example, a place that I know and love, and is heavily, lots of people enjoy for camping and hiking. And several of the properties that the pipeline was seeking for their route, my organization had preserved and either owned in full or had a conservation easement on those lands. So the company came to us and said, we'd like to, came knocking, on the door one day, and said, we'd like to purchase rights of way on several of your properties. And so that led to this whole kind of internal deliberation within the organization about what we were going to do. And ultimately, we came to the decision that we were not going to negotiate and offer any rights to our lands to the company. And furthermore, that we were going to go all in opposing the project. And then kind of went a step further, and that really was the genesis to launch the ReThink Energy New Jersey campaign. So, we felt it was important not just to oppose this one project, but to actually suggest a better way forward and a better alternative, which is really to the broader issue of that we shouldn't be building more projects like this. We need to be transitioning away from fossil fuels. We need to be investing and moving full steam ahead to clean, renewable sources of energy that are appropriately cited. And that's been an important part of our mission from the get-go as an organization that comes out of the kind of open space preservation like tradition and history that yes, we want and need to rapidly scale up wind and solar and other renewable forms of energy, but we need to be thoughtful about where and how we do that, and with sound siting, so that we're not kind of running roughshod over our longstanding open space and natural resource protection efforts. Great.
It's always good to have a solution. If you're going to point out a problem and try to stop it from happening, you've got to have a better alternative, and that definitely leads to some changes in policy of where we are right now. I know there's a lot of subsidies and all that are propping up the oil and gas industries that are kind of keeping them afloat. And without changing the policy, we're kind of stuck and treading water where we are right now.
And it's been amazing. I think we probably at the time didn't quite realize how much we were biting off, and so many the dimensions of this issue, from, as you're pointing out, all the things that are basically all these incentives that are there to expand this fossil fuel infrastructure. And that's really one of the things we learned about Penn East, where, again, the fight began because of the concern of how it would impact some of our preserved lands. And then we really dug into it, and we began to understand all the connections to the fracking in Pennsylvania, learned about, methane as being a extremely potent greenhouse gas, far more potent than CO2 in the short run. Learned about all the incentives that the federal policies that create these. It turns out it's very profitable to build a pipeline like Penn East, whether it's needed or not, because the whole structure is set up right where these companies get. Actually, in Penn East, it would be a 14% rate of return, guaranteed rate of return over 15 years. That sort of goes back to the Natural Gas Act, policies trying to expand this infrastructure throughout the country, which maybe at a time in our nation's history made sense, right? But it doesn't make sense now, and yet those incentives are still there, and that's why you have companies trying to build a pipeline like Penn East when we learned there's no need for it. And we had one of the things we've done throughout our work is we've been able to hire some top flight experts, and this one gas expert at a company called Skipping Stone that really dug in and looked at the Penn East project and discovered there's no need for this project because New Jersey already has today excess pipeline capacity. So even on the coldest days of the winter, and Penn East likes to point to these days, whether it was the polar vortex or the bomb cyclone, right? Over the past 3-4 years, we've had these extreme cold weather events, and they claim that had the pipeline been built, then it would have helped to alleviate those shortages and reduce the cost spikes. Well, our gas expert, looked at the actual data of what was happening during those time periods, and discovered that even on those very cold, extreme winter events, there's excess pipeline capacity. There's actually gas flowing out of New Jersey to point south on those most extreme cold weather events. So there's no need for this project now, let alone in the future, as New Jersey has very intentional plans to significantly transition away from natural gas to renewable energy. It's going to be even less needed in the future than it is today.
Right. So beyond their claims that it safeguards against winter spikes, what were some of the other arguments in favor of the pipeline?
Oh, they talk about cost savings. So that's one of their big arguments. And again, that's a red herring because what they don't say is that it's the customers, it's the ratepayers that pay for these projects. It's $1 billion project. And so in the case of Penn East, what you have are, you have a set of companies that are affiliated, that are both the owner and the customer on this project. So take, for example, New Jersey Natural Gas. New Jersey Resources is the parent company. They're a 20% owner in Penn East. And their affiliated company, New Jersey Natural Gas, is a customer. And so that's just one example of there are about 3 or 4 different sets of partners in this project that are affiliated companies where their owner company is going to sell the pipeline capacity to their affiliate. And what happens is those affiliates, like New Jersey Natural Gas, which is a regulated utility in New Jersey, they can turn around and go to the Board of Public Utilities and get approval to build the costs of that pipeline contract into their rate base and basically pass the costs on to their customers, right? So this is kind of a sweetheart deal where it's like, okay, one side of the company says, we're going to build this pipeline. And then, oh yeah, it's needed because we have contracts for the gas. The contracts are from their affiliated companies who can turn around and pass the cost on to their customers. So there's nothing to lose there. Why not sign on, right? So it doesn't really demonstrate legitimate public need, these self-dealing relationships. And that's one of the big criticisms that we and others have pointed to for this project. And it's not just us. In fact, New Jersey's ratepayer advocate, which is the independent utility consumer watchdog entity in New Jersey, they took a look at this project as well. They came to the same conclusion that we and our gas expert did, which is that this project is not needed. It would be unfair to the ratepayers. They said it would be like winning the lottery for the companies behind the project. And they pointed to these self-dealing contracts between affiliated companies as not, real evidence of need. And it was that 14% rate of return on the project, that was what was really driving this project, not any legitimate public need for it.
Right. It's almost like a shell game to justify the continued fracking in Pennsylvania. If you can't find places to pipe it to, it's hard to justify putting in more fracking wells.
Well, a lot of these pipelines are what they call producer push projects, and they stem from the fact that there is an excess of gas coming out of the Marcellus Shale, and basically, there's just companies looking for markets for that gas. It's not really needed, and that's why we see increasing evidence of a lot of this gas, intended for LNG export and markets overseas. There's not really a legitimate, public need for it in many cases, domestically, and that's certainly true in Penn East. But they got a lot of gas, and they're trying to find, someone to sell it to somewhere.
Right. Unfortunately, it doesn't turn from gas into money until it gets pumped out of the ground and sold to somebody. You can't put it on your books as reserves.
Exactly.
Yep. So where does the project stand right now?
Well, it's been about 5 years. It's been a long and winding road. It has been through, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, review process, which is highly flawed, and really functions largely as a rubber stamp for the industry. And that was true in the case of Penn East. And they granted a certificate to the project despite all these issues that were raised by us and gas experts and the Jersey payer advocate about questioning the need for the project. You know, very significant concerns about the environmental impacts raised by numerous federal agencies and nonprofit organizations and state of New Jersey, DEP, that were all brushed aside, and they got its FERC certificate, which is typically how it goes for these projects when they come before FERC. Of course, that's being challenged. So there is litigation pending over the FERC certificate in the DC Circuit of the U.S. Court of Appeals. We're parties to that, along with Riverkeeper. I know was your guest last week, and others. So there are multiple parties appealing that FERC certificate. And then there's various regulatory approvals that the project still needs. They have some, but not all, their permits from Pennsylvania DEP. They do not have their permits from the New Jersey DEP. In fact, New Jersey DEP has denied their permits twice, which is very encouraging. And they still need approval from the Delaware River Basin Commission. They have an application before the DRBC. And then there's this very kind of interesting, high-profile legal challenge to the project that is now before the U.S. Supreme Court. And that really stems from the question of, whether Penn East has the right to condemn lands preserved by the state of New Jersey. So for the project, especially in New Jersey, Penn East is relying on a really extensive amount of eminent domain. There's been such opposition to the project, especially in New Jersey, but also from many landowners in Pennsylvania as well, that there's over 100 properties in New Jersey that from individual landowners that Penn East had to go to court to actually, condemn those lands. And there are over 40 properties preserved by the state of New Jersey, state preserved lands, preserved open space and farmland, including several that we preserved in partnership with the state. And so Penn East went to court, initially got court approval to condemn both those private lands and those public lands. Well, then the state of New Jersey, the Attorney General, who's been terrific on this issue, and we as parties, because we had several properties that we co-held with the state, appealed successfully to the Third Circuit on the grounds that sort of a constitutional provision called sovereign immunity, which says that under the Constitution, private parties cannot sue states in federal court, that states are immune from being kind of hailed into court by private parties. And so that was the assertion by the Attorney General's office to the Third Circuit that, hey, actually, no, the lower court erred and Penn East didn't have the right to condemn our state preserved lands because we have this sovereign immunity. And so they won. The Third Circuit agreed, overturned the lower court ruling, and all of a sudden Penn East lost any legal rights to over 40 properties that it was relying on for the project in New Jersey. So they then turned around and petitioned the U.S. Supreme Court to review that Third Circuit decision, and in hopes that the U.S. Supreme Court will overturn that Third Circuit decision. So that case is before the U.S. Supreme Court, right now as we speak.
Can you touch on eminent domain a little bit and explain how that works for anybody that's, I know the term, like whose domain is actually superseding the state-owned properties in New Jersey?
Well, eminent domain is well-established legal concept that there are times when governmental entities need to take private lands for some legitimate public purpose. And so I think, the most recognizable examples of that would be perhaps for a public highway project, right? Where there are times when there is a public need to perhaps, certainly throughout history, right, to extend roadways, and And it's unfortunate, but there are times when landowners in the path of a project like that, their lands are needed for that public good, and there needs to be a sort of bona fide public good there. And in that case, the governmental entities can exercise eminent domain and go to court and basically take their lands or portions of those lands. And of course, eminent domain requires just compensation, so that then the landowners have to be fairly compensated for the value of the taking of their land. And of course, I'm sure no one would want to be in that position, and I'm sure that just compensation often does not, make up for the loss or the disruption of people's lives and the loss of their properties. But sometimes that is necessary for the public good. So, and the Natural Gas Act, from which FERC gets its authority here to regulate interstate gas pipelines such as this, it does clearly confer the power of eminent domain to these pipeline developers to be able to take lands if the projects are deemed in the public convenience and necessity, right? So they have to make a finding that there's a public need for this project, and thus it's necessary for the companies to be able to use eminent domain to take lands for the project.
So it's actually the federal government's eminent domain that is being handed over to the developers. That's right. But then they have this sovereign immunity clause of the Constitution, which specifically says that states are immune from being sued, which would include, taking through eminent domain in federal court, unless there's a explicit authorization by Congress to do so. So the Supreme Court case right now, what it really boils down to, what the Third Circuit found is that in the Natural Gas Act, there was no explicit authorization for the holders of a certificate from FERC to basically override the sovereign immunity of states under the Constitution. That there would have to have been explicit, clear language saying that the holder of a FERC certificate has the authority to abrogate that state's sovereign immunity under the Constitution. And that language was not there in the Natural Gas Act, and thus that right was not conferred to the holder of the certificate. That's what the case boils down to, essentially. So we'll hold our breath and hope for the best in the Supreme Court here. But it sounds to me like the Natural Gas Act is next on the agenda for both parties to try to tighten that up and make sure that we get it under control, and it stops in the eyes of renewable energy folks, stops writing blank checks to natural gas companies. But I assume that the natural gas companies are probably taking the exact opposite approach to make sure that they write in the proper power to themselves as well. That's very much true, although there are some hopeful signs for sure. So first, after President Biden was elected, he installed a new chairman at FERC, a fellow named Rich Glick, who for many, many years had been dissenting on a lot of these pipeline votes, including he dissented on Penny's approval and many other projects. So all of a sudden, it's a new day, a real change in leadership at FERC. And one of the things he did at the very first meeting under his chairmanship is he reopened kind of a dormant docket at FERC to re-examine FERC's gas pipeline certification policies. He put all these issues on the table and invited people to comment on questions like, is FERC adequately really examining the need for projects? How should FERC be thinking about the use of eminent domain? How should FERC be examining the climate impacts of these gas pipeline projects? So he's really kind of opened all that up, set the table, and of course, we and many other organizations now are coming in and pointing to all the reforms that are needed to really bring FERC and its pipeline review practices, I think, into the new era, into the climate era, right? And to make some changes that are long overdue to prevent, a massive build out of unneeded fossil fuel infrastructure that's just totally inconsistent with, where we increasingly recognize we need to go as a nation when it comes to energy. Yep. And every year the demand gets less and less as more renewable energy comes online. You need less and less gas and oil to power everything that used to be fossil fuel based.
And these pipeline projects, I mean, they last, decades. I mean, we're talking 30, 40, 50 years. So it's insane to be building out, new gas infrastructure at the same time when, we know just this last week, Earth Week, right? President Biden talked about the need to reduce our emissions 50% by 2030, right? So in just a span of a decade, we have to significantly shift away from fossil fuels. Why would we consider building out, fossil fuel infrastructure designed to last, 30, 40, 50 years?
Right. And once you've built it, you're kind of committed to using it. You can't change your mind after you made that investment.
That's right.
Or you can, but it will cost you.
Yeah, and that's right, and it's us, all of us that'll be paying for it.
Right. Yep. In addition to sort of reforming those policies, what other efforts is ReThink Energy involved in to sort of move the needle toward more renewables?
Yeah, so we got, I'd say, fair to say, much more deeply involved in climate and clean energy policy over the past 5 years than probably we expected. And there were some tremendous opportunities that were created when Phil Murphy was elected governor in New Jersey. And when we started this fight, Chris Christie was governor, and the state's energy policies and energy master plan were very heavily oriented towards natural gas and expanding, natural gas infrastructure. And with Phil Murphy came into office, very much running with climate change as a top priority for his administration. And so we worked very quickly when he came into office. Within 6 months of when he came into office, we and other groups that we partnered with in New Jersey helped pass a landmark clean energy law, which completely reoriented New Jersey's energy policies away from natural gas to renewable energy. And it set the bar higher. It set some lofty goals for the development of offshore wind in New Jersey, which has been proceeding at a very aggressive pace. It set new solar policies in place and created a new community solar pilot program, which is now in its second year and having good success in making solar energy more available to people that haven't had access to it. Can
you describe that a little bit more and how community solar works?
So New Jersey is actually, done quite well with residential rooftop solar and individual homeowners, choosing to put solar on their homes. But for people that don't own single family residences, they really haven't had that opportunity, that access to solar. So community solar is kind of aggregating solar customers together. So this could be a large multi-unit, like apartment complex or townhomes, or where basically the people that live and the customers in those units can, as a unit, basically decide to purchase a contract to get their energy from a solar energy provider. And that funding then can create the resources necessary to put new solar projects on the ground, right? And they're not necessarily, in fact, they typically aren't. They're not on the rooftops of these. They may not even be right, immediately in proximity to them, but they're somewhere, in the vicinity. But it's a financial relationship where you have a solar developer that's going to build a new solar project. And they're going to have a set of customers together make commitments and purchase contracts to get their energy from that solar energy provider. So it's a real win-win. And typically, the way the program has been set up, it's had a real focus on not just bringing access to people that haven't had access to solar, but bringing solar to lower income households and at a cost saving. So they're getting clean solar energy, and they're saving on their electric bill. So it's been a win-win, and it's also had very sound siting in that the criteria for the program highly favor projects that are on rooftops or parking lots or brownfields or landfills. So by and large, almost all of these projects have been located in those types of settings rather than leading to solar on prime farmland or clearing a forest or wildlife habitat for solar. So it's a very successful program and growing in its second year.
Yeah, I've actually contracted with Neighborhood Sun. They've got a project going on a abandoned landfill in South Jersey, and just waiting to fill out their capacity before they can turn the switch on. But it's coming, and it's great to see that they're reclaiming land that wasn't being used for anything else.
Exactly. That's a good example of exactly what the program is doing.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but was New Jersey one of the first states to allow community solar, or in the top 10, I guess?
I believe it's definitely one of the early adopters. Yeah, I don't know exactly in what order, but it's a pioneer on that score.
So that's something that other folks around the country would need to push for their state to allow community solar before those kinds of projects can go up.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's
so we've been very heavily involved on the clean energy law and the implementation of that law. So it set a host of new policies in motion around wind, solar. We've talked a little bit about energy efficiency as well, which is an important, obviously important piece of the puzzle. And then on the heels of that, we helped the state adopt a ambitious energy master plan, which kind of went even beyond the clean energy law. That was adopted last year, and its target is 100% clean energy by 2050. And what was really groundbreaking about the energy master plan is that it was based on a very sophisticated energy model, and this is one of the things that we helped the state develop, working with just cutting edge models that look at the whole energy system and how do you put all these pieces together. It's not just as simple as we just need 100% renewables, and it doesn't matter kind of what they are or where they are. It actually very much matters, because we have to put together a system that works and that can ensure a reliable supply of electricity, because we do have variability, and we have offshore wind, but the wind is not always blowing, and we have solar, but the sun isn't always shining, right? And so you have to put a whole system together that can balance these various resources, and things like batteries and storage as well play an important role, right? Can keep the whole system providing reliable electricity 24/7, 365 days of the year through, variations and extreme weather events that might occur. And so this energy master plan is built on that kind of model and sets out a pathway to meet our emissions reductions targets over time while maintaining a reliable energy supply and controlling costs and making sure that we get there on a least cost pathway, so that this whole transition is affordable, right? Because that matters too.
So the state's goal are 50% renewables by 2030 and 100% by 2050.
So separately, the state has a renewable portfolio standard, which is 50% by 2030. Mm-hmm. So that just looks at how much of, so for all the electricity sold in the state, right, sold and consumed, by 2030, 50% of that must come from renewable sources of energy. The Energy Master Plan actually goes further than that, and it says, okay, what would it take us to get to net zero electric generation by 2050? So that goes beyond the 50% renewables in 2030. How do we get to net zero electric generation in 2050? Mm-hmm. No later than. And it layers in the Global Warming Response Act. which is separate legislation, and we helped to strengthen that just a couple of years ago, which requires that New Jersey's greenhouse gas emissions economy-wide, so not just the electric sector, but all sectors of the economy, must reduce emissions 80% from 2006 levels by 2050.
That's great.
So the Energy Master Plan takes those, both the 100 by 50 in the electric sector and the 80% reduction economy-wide by 2050, and it lays out a pathway based on this sophisticated energy model that can get us to those targets while maintaining reliable energy and putting us on the least cost pathway to achieve those targets.
That's great. So are there incentives, or what are the levers that are being used to push the industry forward towards the renewables? Like, how is the state incenting that?
Well, so you do have the renewable portfolio standard in place, and that scales up. So it's not just like, we go from 0 to 50 in 2030, but as the years go on, we have an increasing amount of the electricity generation that has to come from renewables, and so those are they're called RECs that are actually purchased. So that's a form of payment to companies that are doing renewable energy projects, so incentivizing and supporting that renewable energy. And then there have been additional incentives. So for the offshore wind, the BPU actually has developed, they're called ORECs. So it's sort of like the RECs, but for offshore wind. So there's a particular incentive, sort of subsidy payment there for the offshore wind development. And then similarly in solar, the state already had what are called SRECs, which are like the solar renewable energy credits. And those are, under the Clean Energy Law, those are being revised. So the old SREC program under the law was sunset, and it's being replaced. Right now there's they're called TRECs, the transition RECs in place for solar, and the BPU is developing a successor program to the SRECs as well. So there's a series of different pots essentially that are set up to incentivize and support this renewable energy development in different ways.
That's great. Right. Is there anything you would like to encourage people to do to get involved and help make the process move forward?
Well, I certainly would encourage people to find us at ReThink Energy nj.org and to sign up get on our email list to get regular updates on all of these issues and ways that you can get involved. You can find us on social media at ReThink Energy NJ on Facebook and Twitter. There are some, I think, near-term opportunities that I would flag for people to pay attention to. All these issues about the changes needed at FERC. There is as I mentioned, that docket that's open right now.
Can you remind everyone what FERC stands for again?
The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And they're accepting comments on reforms needed to their review of gas pipelines through May 27th, I believe. And again, if you sign up for information at ReThink Energy New Jersey, we'll keep you informed about that. Another important opportunity I didn't touch on is New Jersey DEP is in the process of updating and strengthening their regulations to deal with the threats posed by climate change. They call it NJ Pact, Protecting Against Climate Threats. And this is a series of regulations regulatory changes that'll strengthen their land use regulations to deal with things like rising sea levels. It'll include some new regulation of emissions from electric plants and from the transportation sector. And they'll be rolling out a series of proposed new regulations and regulatory changes this spring and this summer. And I think that's an important opportunity, and definitely will need a lot of public support for that, because as you might imagine, the various industries that will be impacted by these regulations are pushing back, trying to weaken and undermine those regulations. And that's one where I think we need a strong public clamor for having the right protections in place to protect our health and our safety from the impacts of climate change. And this is one of those things where this makes good economic sense too, because if we don't do these things, we know we're going to pay the price, right? So this is one of those, you can pay me now or you can pay more later, right? And if we don't take the steps to protect ourselves, we're only going to see, we already are seeing, more damage from intense storms and rising seas and flooding. And we've got to take the steps now to protect our communities from those impacts.
Absolutely. Great. And as always, we'll have all of the links and other resources available on our show notes page at sustainabilitynow.global. So you can feel free to head on over there and check that out and the other episodes that we have up online as well. Any parting words, Tom?
No, thank you so much for having me and for doing what you're doing and helping to get the word out on these and other important sustainability issues.
Great.
Appreciate it.
Thanks. And as always, it's everyone listening. You all make all the difference in the world, and none of us can do this by ourselves. So we need to get together, because working together, we can shape a world that works.
Thank you for listening to Sustainability Now. Visit sustainabilitynow.global to find resources related to today's program. While you're there, pledge your support by making a contribution to help us shape a world that works. And remember to subscribe, share, and follow us on social media.